Welcome to the comprehensive DDD support guide. Our company has expanded and we must learn to use our newest employees to the fullest. So in this on and off series, I will explain everything you need to know to conquer the dueling world once more with capitalism. Oh no, this can't be happening. Lance, wake up!
Was I a good soldier, sire? Do you think our lost king, Deviser, would have been proud?
No, Lance, I'll get you out of here. The Queen's going to save us. Stay with me.
So the Queen, I kept the line.
Lance? Lance? He's dead. He's dead. Rebellion! Who's there? And where am I?
I am Sage King Alfred, Warden of this cross, Steward of Return. I have walked between realms since the reign of the great sovereign, the true architect, Arc Crisis.
Arc Crisis? That's just a tale, a myth passed around to scare kids.
Given enough time, even truth decays into folklore. But myths do not speak to the living. I only appear when one's flame flickers low.
He died believing in me, and I failed him. Lance trusted me. They all did.
And they followed you willingly. That is not failure, that is fate.
He asked me if our late Deviser King would have been proud, and I didn't know. I still don't.
Then earn your answer. Let your deeds restore what your words cannot.
Maybe I'm not the sire they think I am. Maybe I never was.
You ask what you are, but you forget who we are. The different dimension does not exist to conquer. It exists to endure. We are loyalty even after death. Bonds forged not in comfort, but in purpose. Our dead do not vanish. They persist. Through us. Through remembrance. Through cause.
Even after death?
Especially after death. That is the contract. The Queen's ambition burns hot, but without you, fire cannot shape destiny. You are still needed. Their sacrifice was not yet. It was the ignition. Now rise, remember who you serve, and carry their flame.
That's right. They didn't die for nothing. I won't let them. Part 5. Post-burst Protocol. What's up my fellow associates, this is Different Dimension Dreamer. I know, this has been a long time again, but we have exciting news. In my absence, Konami dropped another banger. We got a new support card. And this time, it's a fusion. Some of you guys already predicted it, and Konami delivered. In the upcoming main set, Burst Protocol, the fusion monster got announced. His name is DDD Sage King Alfred. Okay, that's great and all, but what does he do exactly? Well, I'm glad that you asked because in my last couple of weeks I've been playtesting heavily with Alfred, and here I will show you some of my findings. So without further ado, let's get started. DDD Sage King Alfred is a level 6 Fusion Fiend effect monster with 1500 attack and 2000 defense. And right off the bat, level 6 is a great level because with him we have more redundancy to go into Big Caesar. But not only that, he has some nice effects as well. His first effect is a fuse effect. It's a trigger effect too, so that means that if he's on the field, you can always trigger it whenever you want in your turn, which is great. And he fuses by shuffling the required materials from the hand, field, banishment, back to the deck or extra deck. This effect by itself is already perfect for grind games because with that we have a bit more resource management. And because of its added redundancy, we can now have more resilient plays through hand traps. But not only that, because Alfred now enables us, because of its shuffle back ability, to deck build very freely. But we will speak about that in a minute. And the second effect is great too. Because it's one of our newer extra deck monsters, of course it shares some synergy with our Crisis's banishment fuse effect. That's why when this guy gets banished, you can now reset as many contracts as possible to your back row. This is dependent on how many DDDs you have on your field, but usually you have at least one if you get field wiped because Doom Queen will special herself, or you get at least 3 or even 4. So no matter the circumstance, usually you can trigger its effect to reset contracts. And if you reset some of the trap contracts that we have, or even some usual contracts that create more follow-up, that is always great. So what is Alfie exactly? Well, Alfie should be seen as a combo piece that extends our plays further or increases our resilience even more, plus adding grind game ability. So from my previous wording, you can already hear that he's not mandatory, but in my opinion, he adds too much value to not include him, so I would argue to include him regardless. So for the sake of this video, let's say we include him regardless in our extra deck. What changes exactly to our deck? I'm glad that you asked because it gets more complicated than you might think. As you've noticed, because of its level 6 nature, we are not required to go into Clovis anymore to reach our Big Caesar checkpoint. So the only thing that you need now to go into Big Caesar is any DD and Necro slime in the grave. Therefore, the only thing that your tuners have to do is go into Siegfried. So with that, you basically have two approaches. First, you go 2 tuners again in our main deck with lands and Orthros, or you cut out Orthros and go with only lands. Both of these approaches have their pros and cons, and I will go in depth about each choice. But in general, I can already tell you that if you go 1 tuner, so basically only having 1 lands, you have to play Clovis sometimes. If you play 2 tuners, however, you can cut out Clovis so that you have more extra deck space, but you have cluttered your main deck with Orthros, so you have to decide. So let's talk about cutting Orthros in general. Orthros has always been regarded as a soft garnet in our community. It doesn't do anything alone, and it is a combo piece or extension piece that is used to go into any synchro play. In the Doom of Dimensions format, you can argue the utility of Orthros simply by the fact that Orthros itself is a second tuner and a level 4, which is great utility. With that alone, Orthros enabled us to play around Bystials and Crows when they banish lands, for example, or it can serve as a way to go into Siegfried with an alternative second tuner. But with the introduction of Alfie, these points aren't as strong anymore. Since Alfie is a level 6, you don't need to go into Clovis before to go into your Big Caesar, but rather use the Alfie and Genghis to go into Big Caesar and keep the lands to go into Siegfried only. And in the case of Bystials and Crows, because Alfie can shuffle back material now, you can just get them back onto the field. Simple as that. So with all these points considered, why would I even think about adding Orthros to my main deck? Well, the reasons are pretty simple. If lands is your only tuner in the deck, and if it gets removed from play somehow, in some way, shape or form, you lose access to all of your synchro lines. And that's a risk that you have to take into consideration. And the second reason is the most important one. Orthros is your only searchable MST in your deck. If you don't play him, you're going to have a very rough time against back row floodgates. Because without Orthros, the only thing that could possibly remove back row is your Doom Queen in the extra deck, and she has to be special. But if you don't worry about these reasons because of the format, for example, that you're playing, you can cut Orthros out. Or you could side him. The point that I want you to take away is that Orthros still has some utility in certain matchups. For example, if you look at the Justice Hunters decks, all of them have some back row which is very cool to remove or force out. And this is best done with Orthros. So Orthros is still a neat utility piece that you can decide to run, but only if the format is right for it. So let's say Orthros is main. What happens? If Orthros is main in your deck, Scale's value increases tenfold. Since Scale has a once per turn level modulation ability from 2 to 4, you can pivot into Clovis or Siegfried with the simple fact that you still have Orthros. So Orthros and Scale become a very crucial synchro play. And with that, Clovis now becomes optional if Orthros is main, simply because Orthros as a level 4 tuner has a great level to go into a level 8 synchro. So let's say you have made Orthros and now you're deciding on whether you want to run Clovis or not. With the introduction of Alfie, Clovis doesn't need to be summoned right from the get-go. In a lot of combo lines, you don't need to go into Clovis right away. So you can actually keep him for follow-up plays to push for game. And sometimes, if the opponent draws 2 Bystials, for example, and 1 DD Crow, Clovis still comes in clutch. So in my opinion, Clovis, regardless of the format, still is very valuable to keep in the extra deck. What about Scale? As I've mentioned previously, Scale's value increases tenfold with Orthros in the main, simply because Orthros and Scale equal Clovis or Siegfried. But without Orthros, Scale is not as valuable anymore. One Scale increases your resilience significantly, for example in Droll lines. And its ability to special itself is always great, and it still adds a lot more resilience in your 2-card combos. But without the synchro lines with Orthros, Scale can be run at 2 and you wouldn't feel a thing. So consider that. But play at least 1, in my opinion, because this guy adds way too much resilience to not play at least 1. Now let's talk about Alfred's niche interactions. Alfred's first niche interaction is very interesting in turn 3 plays, or general follow-up plays in grind game. Since Alfred's fuse effect is an ignition effect, you can just revive him with Ragna again to then access a fusion package. This would be a very interesting game ender without relying on Arc Crisis all the time. Because if you run the necessary fusion targets, you might actually access even more grind game out of it too. In general, you could approach it like this, for example. You can banish the material for Arc Crisis hits the field, and then you can use Alfred to fuse into another fusion so that you can shuffle back the material to your extra deck to then go to a follow-up play if Arc Crisis fails. This could mean that you could rebuild part of your endboard again with a second Big Caesar, for example, because you have shuffled it back by banishing it instead of Solomon. And that is pretty cool, because Alfred, in a way, works like Swamp King, but in reverse. Now to the second niche interaction with Alfred. Let's say you play Book of Eclipse or Book of Moon or something. As you know, if your opponent hits you with a targeting effect, you can flip over your monsters so that the effect fizzles, right? Lunarlight players do it a lot, for example. You might ask yourself why, but the reason is because Lunarlight players can actually fuse with face-down monsters as well. And that's the same for any fusion deck, like Branded, Tyr, and now for us. You can now activate Alfred's fusion effect to fuse face-down monsters by shuffling them back into the deck. And that in itself is very valuable, especially if you face up against opponents that like to flip your monsters, for example, but you run the necessary fusion targets to remove them off your field to combo through. And then in itself, it's a very nice utility to have. Talking about utility, let's briefly talk about Alfred's minimal resource loop. The loop starts with Necro banishing a material in itself to go into Alfred. Then you activate Alfred to go into Genghis, most likely, by shuffling back the banished material, meaning the Necro and the other material, and then the material that you used for your fuse with Necro get recycled. And this is exactly how you should view it. Usually, every material that you banish with Necro will get recycled with Alfred. So you can choose your material according to the ones that you want to shuffle back. And with all that being said, let's talk about Alfred's impact on our playstyle. Since Alfie enables us to shuffle back so much, we can actually keep one Gilga or Clovis, or both, in the extra deck to have some grind game plays. And not only that, but with Alfie, you now have a bigger extra deck toolbox to access, especially with the fusion package. So with that being said, how does the deck list actually look like after the support? Well, I will show you a work in progress deck core. As you already know, I will show you the minimal deck core that you usually play to actually have somewhat enough resilience to do your full combo. As per usual, we have the 3 starters being 3 Kepler, 3 Queens, 3 Gates. And Queen is the best extender, of course, you already know that. And we have Count. Count is great for Droll and Purulia lines. And we max out on our extenders, Gryphon and Scale. Gryphon is pretty self-explanatory, Scale as well, so that we have a good combination of Kepler plus Gryphon or Kepler plus Scale to play around Zero King Contract, Ashes or Impulses. Now we have the bricks as usual, Necro, Lance, Copper and Ragna, and you have already noticed Orthros is missing. I will come to that later. Our extra deck amounts to 12 with Alfie, and now here comes the kicker. People can play a Super Poly package if they wanted to. In that case, you can fit in even 3 Super Poly targets. The 3 Super Poly targets being Mud Dragon, Garura and something else that is good for the meta. Or you can do it more DDD heavy, which is my playstyle. And in this case, I will include not only Arc Crisis for clapbacks, but Kali Yuga as well. Kali Yuga is especially great against back row decks, you already know that. And with Doom Queen and Count, he's especially easy to turbo out. Now, let's talk about the Trap Contract package. The Trap Contract package consists of Small Caesar and the Trap Contract, in this case Eternal Darkness. This is heavily format dependent, meaning that if you have a tournament that has cards like Droplet, for example, or Dark Ruler No Mores, this card becomes very, very good to have, so that Siegfried can negate the card that you want to get rid of, because it usually would be non-interactable. In this case, you would fit in the Trap Contract plus Small Caesar, and in this case, you would amount to 15 extra deck cards. All of them are DDDs. In the pure variant, this is pretty nice to have. Other people could argue that they cut out Small Caesar for something else in the extra deck, and instead they want to have Headhunt. This is also pretty reasonable. The only thing is that with that, you lose the extra layer. Of course, the extra layer being the trap, it is still there and should be technically online, hopefully, but you can't negate a Droplet or a Dark Ruler because you can't flip the Headhunt. You have to have a target on board to flip the Headhunt. So if you think this is a good meta call, you can certainly play it like that and you can adjust all the lines to it. But in my playstyle and in my tournaments, I will keep and stick with the Trap Contract. Now let's talk about Orthros. Orthros in itself is a very interesting topic because Orthros is not needed anymore or required anymore to play around Bystials in the main. Because with Alfie, Orthros becomes redundant. You can just shuffle back lands to turbo out the Siegfried again or make your synchro lines. Orthros only becomes interesting if you want to have more synchro access, for example with Bright, but Bright isn't that great in the current format anymore. Or you know that the opponents you're up against have heavy back row decks. In this case, a searchable MSC is always great, but in my tournaments, it isn't the case. So I will show you a lot of lines right now that will not require Orthros, just to demonstrate to you guys that Orthros is not required to have your usual end board, but still have enough grind game so that you still have at least like 1 Gilgamesh and 1 Clovis in the extra for follow-up plays. So as I've already mentioned, the new end board game plan is to end on the full board still, but try to keep both of the best extenders that we have in the extra deck, meaning still having 1 Clovis and 1 spare Gilga. And lastly, before we do our combos, let's remember ourselves what the card placement should look like on our board. You got it? Great. Now, let's start cooking. Alright, starting off with the revamped 1-card combo of Kepler. We begin as usual with our opening play, go into Doom Queen, and with Doom Queen we're gonna fetch ourselves Zero King Contract to then pop the Doom Queen to special out Copernicus. Copernicus then filters lands, as we already know, and from then onwards we're gonna go and revive our lands by popping the contract, make itself level 4, go into Solomon, and then we're gonna grab ourselves the Gryphon to make ourselves Nib proof. This is basically the same play all over again, but remember, this time we don't have Orthros, so let's see how that works out. We special out Gryphon after foolishing Necro, then go into our Zeus, then we go into Alfie with Necro and Gil, and then we're gonna use Alfie right away to shuffle back Gil and Necro to then go into Genghis, pen out our Gryphon, then revive our lands, and then we can go into our Siegfried, revive our lands again, and then we can go into our Clovis, revive our Copper, and then we're gonna go into our Big Caesar, pop the Copper, Then we pen out our second time, Copper, Gryphon and Kepler. Then we open into Small Caesar, link them off into our second guild, and then we're gonna fetch ourselves our Dark Contract, overlay into Markinex, set our Dark Contract. And there you go, this is your usual endboard. But the difference here is you still have one Gilga left to have grind game. But if you want to have even more grind game, you can do that. But there's a trade-off. Let's assume that we still want to have an endboard that is still somewhat good, but still keeps one Clovis and a spare Gil around to have a bit more grind game than before. But you have to decide whether the trade-off is worth it or not. So the start is always the same. We're gonna use the Hurricane Contract to pop the Queen to special out Copper. Copper will then flush land. Lands will then target Gate to pop it and revive itself, make itself level 4. We go into Solomon and add Gryphon. Now we open into Tel again and then we go into Gilga. We go chaining 1 Tel, chaining 2 Gilga. Gilga will then set Doom Queen and Ragna, and Tel will flush Necro. Then we special out Gryphon and go into Zeus. Now we're gonna pen out Gryphon and Kepler, and then we're gonna revive Lance with Ragna. Lance and Gryphon go into Clovis. Clovis will then revive Lance to go into Siegfried. Now we use Necro and Clovis to go into Alfie. Alfie will then shuffle back Necro and Clovis to go into Genghis. Zeus will then pop Kepler to pen again. Now we pen out Gryphon. Genghis will now revive Copper. Now we go into Big Caesar, we go into Small Caesar and use the Small Caesar for Markinex. With this we only have 9 interruptions, but we still have 1 Clovis and 1 Gilga left. So you have to decide whether you want to have the trap contract and lose some grind game or otherwise. Alright, let's see how the combo looks with an Imperm. As per usual, we're gonna start off with Kepler. Kepler will grab us Gate, Gate will grab us Queen. We're gonna scale the Queen. Queen will get us our Zero King Contract. Zero King Contract will then pop Queen to then special out our Copper. Copper will then foolish Lance. Lance will then pop the contract to special itself and make itself level 4 and go into Solomon. You know the drill. This is basically our usual rank 4 play, and this time we're gonna assume that they hit us on our guild. And now the Imperm comes down. Now let's see what we can manage to do. We foolish Necro, Necro will then go into Alfie, Alfie will then fuse into Genghis by shuffling back Tel and Necro, and then we're gonna special Gryphon so that we can trigger Genghis to revive our lands. With that, we can go into our Big Caesar, then we're gonna go into our Clovis, Clovis will then revive back our lands to go into our Siegfried, and then we're gonna use our Gil to overlay into Markinex. And that's it. That's our box support board. And now we do it without Orthros. How cool is that? How times have changed, huh? Now let's check how the lines have changed with Nib. We're gonna start off as usual again. We're gonna go into our rank 4 line. And this time we're gonna assume that the Nib hits us at the earliest moment, which is Tel. And remember, all these lines are done without Orthros, so that I can prove my point that he's not as mandatory anymore as he used to be. Okay, here it looks like it's same old again, meaning we go into Solomon, then we go into Tel after we grab our Gryphon with Solomon, but check this out. Alright, so the Nib's gonna hit us. Great. What now? Tel will foolish Necro. Necro will be used for Alfie by using Tel as material to shuffle it back to go into Genghis. Now we're gonna special out Gryphon, and with Genghis, we're gonna revive our Solomon. So that we're gonna overlay into Tel again to then go into Big Caesar and then link it off to go into Gilga, so that we go chaining 1, Tel chaining 2 Gilga. Gilga will set Queen and Ragna, and Tel will foolish Gryphon. Ragna will reborn the other Gryphon so that we can, because now we can fetch the scale. Scale will then special itself to make itself level 4. Then we go and overlay into your Caesar. Then we're gonna go into our Zeus. Then we're gonna pop our Caesar with our Zeus so that we can special our Queen, which then pops the Nib. And our popped Caesar will fetch our trap. We're gonna pant out Gryphon again so that we can then go and link off into our second Gilga and then overlay into Markinex and set the trap. This board is a bit weaker without Orthros, but we don't have to play Orthros to still end on something that is quite hard to pass, let's be honest. Now, same old goes, let's assume we get nibbed this time on Gil rather than Tel. Don't worry, I will spare you the details of the starting sequence since it's always the same old as usual because it's the standard rank 4 play that everyone does. And I will only chime in when the actual difference happens, meaning when the Nib hits the field and we don't have Orthros, of course. And here we go, chaining 1, Tel chaining 2 Gil. Gil sets Queen and Ragna, and Tel will foolish Necro, of course. And now the Nib is hitting the field. Alright, let's get to work. This time we're gonna use Necro and Gil to go into Alfie, and then we're gonna use Alfie to shuffle back the Gil and the Necro to go into Genghis, special out the Gryphon so that we can revive our Tel. Now we go into our Big Caesar, then we go into our Gil a second time, then Tell will foolish our Gryphon so that we can pen out the Gryphon to then revive the other Gryphon with Ragna so that we can grab ourselves a Scale. Both Gryphons go into our Caesar, then we special out Scale so that we can go into our Zeus, then we're gonna use Zeus to pop our Caesar so that we're going to chain link 1 Caesar, chain link 2 Queen to pop the Nib and fetch the trap. Then we special out our Scale with the second pen, and then we go into our third Gil, overlay it into Markinex and set the trap. And as you can see, it's the same board as the previous one again, but this time with a different Nib spot. Speaking of, let's explore the last Nib spot possible before Zeus would be live, which is the Nib on Gryphon. The combo sequence before that is always the same as usual. It is the standard rank 4 play as you have known from Doom of Dimensions previously, with the only difference being that we scale Queen and Ragna rather than Orthros and Ragna. Therefore, let's enjoy the cutscene together, then I will chime in again if it's different. Alright, now let's threaten Zeus by specialing out Gryphon, and then the Nib has to hit the field. Okay, so what do we do? For starters, let's use Necro to go into Alfie by using Tell. Alfie will then shuffle back Tell and Necro, and then we're gonna use Ragna to revive our Gil, so that we can use Genghis to revive our Copper, so that we then go into our Big Caesar and go into Zeus. We pent out Copper and Gryphon so that we can go into our Small Caesar, then we're gonna pop the Small Caesar with Ragna so that we can special out our Queen, and then we're gonna fetch our trap with our Small Caesar. We pent out Kepler so that we can go into our second Gil, and then we're gonna overlay it into our Markinex and set a trap. And just like that, we did the same board again after it hit the last possible Nib spot. Okay, and this is how it looks like when the opponent waited for it too long. As per usual, the start is always the same, so I won't bother you with it. So let's just autopilot and enjoy the music. Alright, if for some reason the opponent now decides to hit the Nib when we went out of our way to get Zeus live, this is how we full combo. Alright, we banished Gil and Gate to negate the Nib. Now we use Necro and Tell to go into Alfie, and then we're gonna use Alfie to shuffle back Gil and Tell to go into Genghis. As per usual, Ragna will revive lands, and Genghis will then revive Copper. Now we overlay into Big Caesar, then we're gonna go into Clovis. Clovis will then revive lands to go into Siegfried. We're gonna pen out Copper, Gryphon and Kepler. Copper and Gryphon go into Small Caesar, then we're gonna link them off into Gil. Small Caesar will then grab the trap contract, we're gonna overlay into Markinex and set the trap contract. And as you can see, the line is Nib proof, just as usual. And we ended on full board again, so it never mattered. And if you want to have more grind game, you can trade in the trap contract for Clovis in the extra deck, remember that. Alright, let's see how we play around Meowls. Spoiler, it's crispy. And don't worry, I don't intend to give them any draws whatsoever. Alright, the start is always the same. The only caveat is this line will use count. Alright, after placing our Zero King contract, we're gonna pop the Queen to special out our account, as I said, and then we're gonna grab ourselves a Copper. So we're basically doing a Link 2 play. This time we're gonna place Gryphon and Ragna, then we're gonna pen summon out our Copper. Copper will then foolish our Necro. We then go into our Zeus, then we're gonna pop the Gryphon, and then we're gonna pop a contract with Zeus so that we can special out the Queen to pop herself and then rescale herself. Now we're gonna pen summon out Copper, Gryphon and Kepler. Copper and Gryphon go into Small Caesar. We go into our second Gil so that we can then fetch our trap. Now we're gonna use Necro and Gil to go into our Alfie. Alfie will then shuffle back Necro and Gil so that we can summon out our Genghis. Now we go into our Big Caesar, overlay into our Markinex and set a trap. And this is almost full board with 0 draws for double Meowls. Insane. But what about Purulia? Well, I'm glad that you asked, because that's what we're gonna do now. But this time we have to get Gate instead of Kepler. Gate grabs Queen, Queen will scale herself, then we're gonna place our Zero King contract to then pop Queen to then special out, you guessed it, Copper. As usual, Copper will foolish lands, lands will special itself by popping a contract, then we go and special out our Queen, and then we're gonna level up our lands level 4, make it so that we can go into a Solomon. Solomon will then grab ourselves a Gryphon so that we can go into Tell, and then link it off into Gil. Chaining 1 Tell, chaining 2 Gil. Gil places Gryphon and Ragna, and then we're gonna foolish our Necro. We're gonna use Necro and Tell to go into Alfie, and then we're gonna use Alfie to fuse into Genghis by shuffling back Necro and Tell. Then we're gonna special out Copper with Ragna. Genghis will revive our lands. We go into Big Caesar. We go into our Clovis to special out our lands, place it in the middle of Gil, pop the Gryphon so that we can then scale the other Gryphon so that we can then pent out Copper and Gryphon. Overlay into Small Caesar, then we go into our Zeus. Small Caesar gets us a lower trap. Now we go into our Siegfried, then we overlay into our Machinex and set a trap. The reason why I went into Siegfried so late is because I wanted to play around Relinquished Anima. And as you can see, after 2 Purulias, we made a board which was Dark Ruler proof. With a 1-card combo, mind you. Awesome, isn't it? Now let's talk about some other combos. The Gate Droll combo. By opening Gate, we usually get our Queen. Queen will then set our Zero King contract, but we get Droll, but this is no problem. The Zero King contract pops Queen so we can special our Copper again, then we're gonna foolish our lands. Lands will then revive itself by popping our contract. Now we special our Queen. Go to our Clovis. Clovis will then revive our lands. Lands and Queen go into Gil. Gil sets Queen and Ragna. We're gonna pen out Copper. We're gonna revive our lands with Ragna, and then we're gonna make lands level 4. Then we're gonna overlay into our Small Caesar, then we're gonna overlay into our Tell and burn the opponent, and then we're gonna leak it off into Zeus with Gil. Tell then foolishes our Necro. Necro and Gil go into Alfie. Alfie then shuffles back Necro and Gil to go into Genghis. Clovis and Alfie go into our Big Caesar, then we're gonna revive our lands with Genghis, then we go into our Siegfried and overlay our Zeus into Machinex. This is pretty okay with a 1-card combo against Droll, I would say. What about Queen against Droll? If you for whatever reason can suspect that there is a Droll, you can set Zero King contract immediately, pop Queen for count, counter will then fetch our Copper, we get Drolled, then normal summon Copper to foolish lands, go into our Gil so that we can set Gryphon and Ragna. We're gonna pop the Gryphon targeting Gil, then we're gonna activate lands in the grave to special itself by popping a contract, Queen will special herself and pop herself to scale herself. Now we pen out Copper and Gryphon, overlay into our Small Caesar, overlay into our Tell, burn the opponent, then we link off into Zeus with Gil and Tell. Tell then foolishes Necro and then we go Necro and Gil into Alfie. Alfie shuffles back Necro and Gil to go into Genghis. We trigger Ragna to revive our Gryphon, we're gonna trigger Genghis then to revive our Copper. Gryphon and lands go into our Clovis, then we're gonna revive our lands. And then we're gonna go overlay into our Big Caesar and then go into our Siegfried. We're gonna pop Copper with Zeus. Pen out a second time, penning out Copper and Gryphon so that we can go into Solomon and overlay into Machinex. This time with no contracts, but Machinex is still live because it has 3 materials. This is pretty decent even without Orthros, especially since we have both Gilgas left. Now let's talk about the hand traps that usually require Orthros to play around it, but this time we don't need it because we have Alfie already in our extra deck. Let's start with the first set of hand traps being the Bystials and Necro. So, the Bystial protection goals remain the same because we still want to protect lands and Necro from the Bystials, because if we lose lands, we lose Siegfried, and if we lose Necro, we lose Alfie. Last time it was Genghis, but the context doesn't change that much. That's why the Bystial scenarios remain the same as well. In the first scenario, we still try to eat the Bystial, meaning everything right up to the point where we are still not Bystial proof, we try to play through it somehow. Last time we did it by using Clovis, but this time we try it by using Alfie only, meaning if our Necro or lands gets Bystial, we try to shuffle it back with Alfie and try to either foolish it, summon to our field, or add it to our hand to continue our plays. And the second scenario is the easiest because then Zeus is online and we can just negate the Bystial. So in summary, our anti-Bystial game plan goes as follows after Alfie. So generally we try to combo through so that we can achieve our checkpoint where we arrive at Zeus and Zeus is online so that they can negate the Bystial. And if they do it earlier than that, we can just simply eat it and continue comboing through like nothing happened. Sounds easy, right? So let's do it without Orthros. Let's show you the first Bystial line without Orthros with a 1-card combo. The start is always the same, but this time we assume that we get Bystial right when our lands gets foolish for the first time with Copper. And here we go, we get Bystialed. What's next? Well, I'm glad that you asked. We go into Gilga. With Gilga we can set Gryphon as scale, then we're gonna pen out Copper and Doom Queen. Doom Queen will then be used to go to Zeus. Zeus will then pop our scale to then bounce back our Gryphon, so we can special out the Gryphon and go to our Solomon. And then we're gonna pop off. It is important to detach Gryphon with Solomon's effect to grab Ragna. Ragna will then get scaled to overlay into Tell. Then we're gonna revive our Gryphon so that we can make use of Gryphon's fetch ability to add ourselves a scale. Now we special out the scale to make it sellable 4, we can overlay into small Caesar so that we can link Tel and Caesar off into our second guild so that we can then grab ourselves a trap contract and foolish our Necro. Necro and Gil go into Alfie, and then we gonna use Alfie to fuse into Genghis by shuffling back Gil and Lance. We then overlay into Machinex so that we can revive our Tel with our Genghis. We go into our big Caesar, then we go into our shuffled back Gil so that we can use Tel's foolish to foolish Lance. Lance will then pop the contract to revive itself. Doom Queen with special, pop herself and rescale herself so that we can then special out our scale. And then we're gonna make Lance level 4 so that we can then go into our Clovis, and with Clovis we're gonna revive our Lance again so that we can go into our Siegfried. And then we have almost full board without Doom Queen in the face-up extra deck, but that's okay considering we had a Bystial. If we would have Orthros, we wouldn't use Clovis here, but this time we don't. But considering this is a 1-card combo without Orthros, this is a pretty good result either way. What about the other points of interaction that are left off? Speaking of, let's say they Bystial us when Lance gets revived, meaning when we actually pop our contract already. The start is always the same, so I will spare you the details. And right here, the Bystial counts as chainlink 2. So, what now? Well, first things first, we're gonna special out Doom Queen so that we can pop the Magnemud, and then we go into our Gilga right away. Gil will then set our Gryphon and scale again. We're gonna go into our Zeus, pend out our Copper and Doom Queen. Pop the scale so that we can bounce back our Gryphon. Gryphon will then get special, go into our Solomon, and with Solomon we go into our Solomon play again. We detach the Gryphon to grab ourselves the Ragna. Then we're gonna overlay into Tel so that we can burn the opponent. Then we scale the Ragna, link off Queen and Tel so that we can chain link 1 Tel to foolish chain link 2 Ragna to revive the Gryphon. Obviously we're gonna foolish the Necro. Gryphon will then grab another Queen. Then we use Necro and Gil to go into our Alfie. Alfie will then shuffle back Lance and Gil so that we can go into Genghis. Then we scale our Queen, go and pen out a second time our scale to make it level 4, and then overlay into our small Caesar. Then we revive our Tel with our Genghis. Now we go into our second Gil so that we can then get ourselves a trap contract and then foolish our Lance back. Then we overlay into our big Caesar. Then we're gonna overlay one of our Gils into our Machinex and set the trap contract. Sadly this time we don't end on a Siegfried, but we still have a float with the other Gil, so it is technically online if the opponent pops it. You could still on a Siegfried though if you would have Orthros. Now let's assume they hit us on Necro's Foolish. The start is always the same, so I will spare you the details. So in the meantime, let's talk about something interesting. As you have seen so far, without Orthros, our endboard doesn't look that weak. But if you really want to always consistently end on Siegfried no matter what, and have even more resilience against a combination of hand traps, but this is very format dependent, so you better do the better meta calls for that. These combos should demonstrate you that we are not required to use Orthros anymore if we don't want to. Speaking of, now we get hit with the Bystial on Necro. Alright, so what's the game plan? Okay, with Gryphon and Gil we go into our Zeus. We're gonna pen the first time by penning out Gryphon and reviving our Lance with Ragna. Then we go into our Clovis, get our Necro back, and then we're gonna pop it with Zeus. Necro and Gil go into our Alfie, Alfie will then shuffle back Gil and Necro to go into our Genghis. Now we pen the second time, this time we penned out Kepler and Gryphon. Go into our Gil, Genghis revives our Lance. Clovis and Genghis go into our big Caesar, then we go into our Siegfried and overlay into Machinex. This time we lost our trap contract, but everything else is there, which is pretty great. Now let's talk about the last Bystial spot. This one's pretty weird, but let's assume we get Bystial right when we special out our Gryphon before we go into our Zeus, and they for some reason banish our Lance instead of our Necro. This start is always the same, so I will spare you the details here. The funny part about this combo and the previous one are that these are the combos that force the opponent out, so that they have to use the Bystial, because otherwise we get insulated with Zeus. Watch, this right here is the last time where they could Bystial us by specialing out the Gryphon, because otherwise Zeus is there. And oh no, they picked the wrong one and they banished Lance. Okay, anyways, we go into our Zeus. Necro and Gil go into Alfie immediately. Alfie will then shuffle back Lance and Gil so that we go into our Genghis. Now we pen out our Gryphon. Genghis will then revive our Tel. We overlay into our big Caesar. Pop Tel with Ragna. Tel chaining 1, Queen chaining 2, pop Magnemud. And Tel foolishes Lance again, and then we're gonna revive Lance with Ragna. Then we go into our Clovis. Clovis will then revive our Lance. then we go into our Siegfried, then we go and pan out our Gryphon and link off into our Gil so that we can overlay into our Machinex. Well, this board doesn't have the trap contract, but I would say the board is still pretty alright without Orthros. So you have to decide. Now lastly, let's assume the opponent really slept on throwing that Bystial, meaning that we have Zeus online already. Well, in that case, the combo really looks the same as the one card Kepler combo, just with the difference that we use the Zeus instead of just having it as decoration. As the start is always the same, let's remind ourselves that we always have a pivoting option, meaning that if we want to have more grind game and we want to keep the Clovis in our extra deck, we can do that by not ending on the trap contract in our end board. But then this variation, this line will end on the trap contract, because another layer of interruption is always nice. Alright, Zeus will negate the Bystial by banishing Gil and Gate. Necro and Tel go into Alfie. Alfie will then go into Genghis by shuffling back Gil and Tel. Ragna will revive lands. Genghis will revive Copper. Then we go into Big Caesar. Then we go into Clovis and revive lands. To then go into Siegfried. Now we're gonna pet out Copper, Gryphon and Kepler. Copper and Gryphon go to Small Caesar. Then we go into Gil so that we can get the trap contract with Small Caesar. Overlay into Machinex and set the trap contract. And just like that, we have full board again. But as I said, if you want to have Clovis instead of the trap contract, you can do that. It's your choice either way. It's nice to have pivoting options after all. Now let's talk about more in-depth deck theory. Because if you've noticed, all the lines that I did so far triggered K9 Izuna. And since K9 is still pretty prevalent, up until this video at least, we have to talk about that. The issue about K9 is that K9 cannot be played around against in the lines that I'm doing right now, but there are different lines that can do it. And before I show you them, I wanted to explain to you how K9 Izuna works. As a small recap, Izuna can special herself in the turn that you play in, basically like Telements all over again, but with the condition that you have to trigger a hand or graveyard effect first so that Izuna can special herself to do her thing. And Izuna usually foolishes another K9, and that K9 being Lupus, so that Lupus can special himself and then they can overlay into a rank 5 play. All for a turn 0 play that might interrupt you so badly that you can't play further. So the issue of the lines that I've shown you before are that I have triggered lands already, and lands is a graveyard effect. And Necro is one as well. And Gryphon and Scale are hand effects, which are usually our best extenders. So to play around K9 Izuna, you have to have Zeus online before you use Necro, Lance, Gryphon or Scale. So how do you do that? Well, I'm glad that you asked, because in our DDD community, we have something that are the so-called rank 4 or link 2 plays. Now let me break it down to you what it actually entails. Rank 4 and link 2 have two distinct features. When the DDD community refers to rank 4 lines, they usually refer to the lines that I've shown you already in a lot of videos, meaning the lines that actually go to Solomon first to actually fetch something, for example the Gryphon, to force out the Zeus play, right? And the advantages of these lines are, at least in the one card combos, that they play around a lot of hand traps. For example, the choke point hand traps like Gilgamesh, Imperms, Nibs and Bystials. What they don't play around are the K9 Izunas or Ghost Spells. But this doesn't mean that the one card combos can't play around them. They actually can, but you have to use the link 2 lines for that. The link 2 lines refer to Gilgamesh. That means that when you have 2 bodies, you don't go into Solomon, but you want to go to Gilgamesh instead, so that you play around Ghost Spell and Izuna. These lines are inherently anti-Bystial as well, so that is covered too. But they will hard lose on an Imperm on Gilgamesh, so the choke point from back then is back. Another interesting part is that without Orthros, the one card combos become susceptible to Nibs in the link 2 lines. So this right here is a catch-22 situation for our DDD players, because we have to assess whether the opponent is on the K9 stuff or Ghost Spells, or if they are on Imperms and Nibs, because either way we have to take into account to lose to either one of them if we don't play Orthros. But if we do play Orthros, however, things become more interesting, because with that, we can actually cover Nibs as well in the link 2 plays, which means that we only hard lose against an Imperm or Veiler or Ghost Mourner against our guild. So if you play Orthros, the hand trap coverage becomes better with the Link 2 line, but you will reintroduce your classic choke point again, and now you have to decide whether you want to have that or not. It all comes to meta calls at the end of the day, so if you know that your format in your locals, regionals, or whatever you play in doesn't use imperms, or imperm is not really needed or not really popular, the Link 2 line will be better in most cases, if you play Orthros especially. And if you don't play Orthros, it's going to be even more format dependent. But as a small reminder, this video will not talk about any specific Orthros combos whatsoever. Because in my opinion, Orthros, after Alfred especially, is heavily format dependent. If, as I said already, you are in a format which is back row heavy, Orthros is fair game. Or if you know that after siding, you get floodgated, Orthros is fair game as well because the searchable MST is good. But if you know that that is not likely in your format, Orthros is arguably cuttable, as you have seen in my previous combos already. And right now, I will show you the Link 2 K9 line, which will not use Orthros, and that will work still. Alright, let's present you the Link 2 line. The beginning is always the same, but then you will notice a certain shift. Watch. So everything up until the point where we special out Copper from the deck with Zero King contract by popping Queen, everything is the same. The difference is that Copper this time forces Gryphon. Now we go and link off into Gil and then set Gryphon and Ragna. We're gonna pen out our Copper, then we're gonna pop our Gryphon by targeting our Gil. Copper and Gil go into our Zeus. Zeus pops the contract, then we're gonna special out our Queen. Queen will pop herself, we go chaining 1 Ragna to revive our Gryphon, chaining 2 Queen to rescale herself. Gryphon will add lands, and this time we are Izuna proof already. Now we're gonna pen out lands, Copper, the second Gryphon, and Kepler. Lands turns itself to a level 4. Gryphon and Copper go into Solomon. Solomon will then grab our Scale. Scale will then special itself, make itself level 4, and that isn't a triggers, but we can negate her. The wonders of Zeus. Scale and Gryphon go into our Small Caesar, then we're gonna go into our Tell, burn the opponent, and link off Tell and Small Caesar to our Gil. We go chaining 1 Tell, chaining 2 Small Caesar, and chaining 3 Scale to bounce back our Kepler. We grab ourselves a Trap contract, and then Foolish the Necro. Necro and Tell go into Alfie. Alfie will then shuffle back our Tell and Gil, and here comes the Genghis. We overlay Gil into Machinex so that we can trigger our Genghis to revive our Gryphon. Genghis and Alfie go into our Big Caesar, then we go into our Siegfried, and then set the Trap contract. We might have lost our Queen in the face-up extra deck, but this time we still have a Clovis and a spare Gil so that we can go into grind game, which is awesome. This is a pretty strong line considering we can play around Ghost Bells and Bystials too. Now let's talk about the 2-card combos. As you already know, Gryphon and Scale are still the remedies for Ash or Impulse on our biggest choke point being Zero King contract. So maximizing on both of them would be advisable, even though you won't play Orthros. At least in this build, but I digress. And as a small reminder for everyone, we want to protect ourselves from Ash for the Zero King contract. Why? Because usually when we do our Doom Queen play, as you have seen in the 1-card combos, when we get stopped by our Zero King contract, Queen is usually in the pen scale, which means that it clogs the pen zone, and then Gilga is shut down, and that's a bad look. And back then, the 2-card combos with Kepler as the starter and then Gryphon or Scale as an extender solved that problem. And with Alfred, we can solve that problem without Orthros too. Because in the old combos, I heavily relied on Orthros, and this time, not so much. So let's talk about the Ash scenarios. First scenario, we try to eat it. That means that every possible point of interaction of Ash where it can get thrown, for example when Kepler gets a search, when Gate gets a search, when Solomon gets a search, we still try to eat it and then combo through to end on an almost, if not even a full board plus grind game ability. And the second scenario is simpler, where after a certain point we have reached the checkpoint where Zeus is online, and when we then activate Zero King contract, Zeus can actually protect it by negating Ash. So to summarize, if you want to play around an Ash on the Zero King contract, you can first try to eat it with the first scenario, and then if you've reached a checkpoint, you can simply activate Zero King contract because Zeus can protect it. And with Alfred, I'm gonna do it without Orthros. Alright, starting off with an Ash on Kepler, we're gonna assume we have Gryphon. Alright, we attempt to search Gate and it gets ashed. Anyways, we're gonna special out Gryphon to then go into Gil so that we can then set Doom Queen and Scale. Afterwards, you're going to pen out Gryphon and Kepler to then go into Zeus with Kepler and Gil. Zeus then pops Scale to then bounce back Queen. Afterwards, we're going to rescale the Queen to directly set the gate so that we can then search Scale and then going to special Scale and turn it level 4. Then we're going to open into Solomon to then detach Gryphon to add Ragna, and Ragna will then get scaled. Afterwards, we open into Tell so that we go chaining 1 Ragna to revive Gryphon, chaining 2 Tell to burn the opponent. Gryphon will then add the Zero King contract. We're then going to activate the Zero King contract to pop Tell so that we can go and special out Copper. Then we go chaining 1 Tell, chaining 2 Coppers to Foolish, and we Foolish lands and Necro. We're going to pop the gate to revive lands and make it level 4. Lands and Copper go into Siegfried. We're going to use Necro and Gil to go into Alfie. Alfie will shuffle back lands and Gil to go into Genghis. Then we're going to pen out Copper. We open into Small Caesar, and then we're going to revive Tell. Then we're going to link off Small Caesar and Tell into Gil. We go chaining 1 Small Caesar, chaining 2 Tell to then Foolish lands and then add the Trap contract. Then we overlay into Big Caesar, then overlay into Markinex and set the Trap contract. The only thing that we have lost is the Doom Queen in the face-up extra deck, but considering the fact that we still have Clovis and Gil for grind game purposes on board, it's a pretty reasonable trade-off. If you really want to have more ceiling though, you can still have it by adding Orthros, but I didn't include it. Alright, this hand, let's assume we get Ash on Kepler again, and we have Scale instead of Gryphon. Well, anyways, we're going to special out Scale and then we're going to go into Gil. Gil will then set Doom Queen and Ragna. Then we're going to pen out Scale and Kepler, and we're going to then use Scale and Gil to go to Zeus and then bounce back our Doom Queen. Then we're going to rescale Doom Queen so that we can directly set our gate, and then we're going to add ourselves a Copper. Zeus then pops Kepler to pen again. Then we're going to pen out Copper, Scale and Kepler. Then we're going to go chaining 1 Copper, chaining 2 Scale. Scale is level 4 now and Copper Foolish lands. Then we overlay into Solomon so that we can get Zero King contract. We're going to activate the Zero King contract and then overlay into Tell so that we burn the opponent. Afterwards, we're going to pop the gate to revive lands. We turn lands to level 4, and then we're going to pop the Kepler to special out our Gryphon. Gryphon and lands go into Small Caesar. We link off Small Caesar and Tell into Gil. We go chaining 1 Tell, chaining 2 Small Caesar. Small Caesar gets a Trap contract, Tell Foolishes Necro. Necro and Gil go into Alfie. Alfie then shuffles back Necro and Gil to go into Genghis. Then we're going to revive lands with Ragna. Lands and Alfie go into Siegfried, and then we're going to revive Alfie with Genghis. We overlay into Big Caesar, then into Markinex and set the Trap contract. And just like that, almost full board again, only missing the Doom Queen in the face of extra deck and still having Clovis and Gilgamesh in the extra deck for a grind game. Awesome! So as you can see, the 2-card combos are pretty strong without Orthros still. Okay, let's assume you really want to have Doom Queen in the face of extra deck. What do you do? Well, don't you worry, I can inform you that we can still do that, but with some sacrifices. We're gonna special Scale so that we can go into Gil. Gil will then set Doom Queen and Ragna still. Then we're gonna pen out Scale and Kepler. Scale and Gil go into Zeus, then we're gonna bounce back the Doom Queen, and then gonna rescale the Doom Queen to set directly the gate. With gates, we're gonna add the Copper still. We're gonna pop the Kepler with Zeus to pen again, and now we're gonna pen out Copper and Scale only. We go chaining 1 Copper, Foolish lands, chaining 2 Scale to level 4. Then we're going to Solomon, and then we're going to add Zero King contract. Then we're going to Tell to burn the opponent. Then we activate the Zero King contract to pop the Queen instead, to then special out Gryphon. Then we're going to pop the gate with lands and make lands level 4. Then we over into Small Caesar, link them off into Gil, go chaining 1 Tell, chaining 2 Small Caesar. Small Caesar adds a Trap contract, Tell Foolishes Necro. Necro and Gil go into Alfie. Alfie shuffles back Necro and Gil to go into Genghis. Ragna revives Gryphon instead. We go chaining 1 Gryphon, chaining 2 Genghis to revive lands. Gryphon will add another Doom Queen. Then we over into Big Caesar, go into Clovis. Clovis will then revive lands again to then go into Siegfried. Then we over into Markinex, scale the Doom Queen, and set the Trap contract. And just like that, you have full board, plus the Doom Queen in the face-up extra deck, but you traded it off for a Clovis. So even though you still have 1 spare Gilga, your grind game is comparably worse than before. So anyways, let's assume we get Ash on a gate this time. We're gonna add Gate, and Gate will try to search something, but it gets negated with Ash. Well anyways, we're gonna special out Gryphon and then go into Gil. Gil will then set Doom Queen and Scale. And now we're gonna pen out Gryphon and Kepler. Kepler and Gil go into Zeus, and Zeus will pop Scale to then bounce back the Doom Queen to rescale the Doom Queen. Doom Queen will directly set the Zero King contract, and the Zero King contract will then pop Doom Queen to special out Copper. Copper will then Foolish lands. Then we go into Solomon to then detach Gryphon to then add Ragna. Then we're gonna scale Ragna and overlay into Tell. We go chaining 1 Ragna to revive Gryphon, chaining 2 Tell to burn the opponent. Gryphon now adds another Doom Queen. Now we pop the Gate to revive lands and then turn it level 4. Now we can go into Siegfried, we scale the Doom Queen and then we're gonna pen out Scale and Gryphon. Scale will turn level 4. Then we go into Small Caesar and then we're gonna link off Tell and Small Caesar to Gil. Go chaining 1 Tell to Foolish Necro, chaining 2 Small Caesar to grab the Trap Contract. Necro and Gil go into Alfie. Alfie will shuffle back lands and Gil to go into Genghis. Then we overlay into Markinex so that we can revive our Tell with Genghis. We overlay into Big Caesar and set the Trap Contract. And just like that, full board plus Tell as a Foolish, Doom Queen in the face of extra deck, and still having Clovis and 1 spare Gil for a grind game. This is very awesome, without Orthros even. So this right here doesn't feel really bad at all. What about Scale? Let's check it out. So we assume the opponent is ashing us on Gate again, and this time we have Scale instead of Gryphon. Well, if that's the case, just special out Scale, then we go into Gil, and Gil will set Doom Queen and Ragna. Then we're gonna pen out Scale and Kepler. Scale and Gil go into Zeus so that we can then bounce back Doom Queen so that we can rescale Doom Queen to then set directly Zero King Contract. Zeus will then pop Kepler to Pent again, and we're gonna pen out Scale and Kepler. We're gonna turn Scale to level 4 and then we're gonna pop Kepler with Zero King Contract to special out Copper. Copper will then Foolish lands. Then we go into Solomon and Solomon will add Gryphon. Then we over into Tell and then we burn the opponent. And we're gonna pop the gates to revive lands and then turn lands to level 4. Then we're gonna special out Gryphon and then we're gonna overlay into Small Caesar. We're gonna link off Tell and Small Caesar to Gil so that we can go chaining 1 Tell, chaining 2 Small Caesar. Small Caesar will grab the Trap Contract and then we're gonna Foolish Necro. Necro and Gil go into Alfie. Alfie then shuffles back Necro and Gil to go into Genghis. Ragna will then revive lands. Alfie and lands go into Siegfried and then we're gonna revive Alfie with Genghis. Then we over into Big Caesar and then into Markinex and then set the Trap Contract. And just like that, almost full board again with only the Doom Queen in the face of extra deck missing. But we still have Clovis and Gilga though in the extra deck. That means we still have a lot of grind game to do. But if you really want to have the Doom Queen in the face of extra deck, you can do that. Now let's assume we get ashed on Soul. In this line it doesn't really matter whether we get choked on Gryphon or Scale, since both lines converge into Solomon and we get ashed on Solomon, so that's that. So we're gonna special out Gryphon and then we're gonna special out Scale and make itself level 4 to overlay into Solomon and then try to add something with Solomon. And this gets negated and oh no. Well anyways, we're gonna overlay into Tell, we're gonna then go into Gil and then we're gonna go chaining 1 Tell, chaining 2 Gil. Gil will set Doom Queen and Ragna, we're gonna Foolish Necro, and we're gonna pen out Kepler and then we're gonna revive Scale with Ragna. Scale and Gil go into Zeus. And we're gonna bounce back Doom Queen to rescale the Doom Queen. Doom Queen will directly set the Zero King Contract. And the Zero King Contract will then pop the Queen to then special out Copper. Copper will then Foolish lands. Lands will then pop the gate to revive itself. Doom Queen will then special herself. We're gonna then turn lands to level 4 and go into Siegfried right away. Necro and Gil go into Alfie and then Alfie shuffles back lands and Gil to go into Genghis. Kepler and Doom Queen go into Gil. Genghis will then revive Gryphon to then add Doom Queen. Then we over into Big Caesar, scale the Doom Queen, Zeus then pops Gryphon to pen again, then we're gonna pen out Copper and Gryphon. Then we go to Small Caesar and then gonna link them off into Gil. Small Caesar will then get the Trap Contract and then we're gonna over into Markinex and set the Trap Contract. And as you can see, we ended on full board again, with Doom Queen in the face of extra deck, but we don't have the spare Gil anymore. But we still have Clovis though. So with this line, grind game is still possible, so that works. Now lastly, let's assume the opponent threw Ash too late because they just want to keep it for Zero King Contract, and then they will realize it never mattered. So anyways, we're gonna special out Gryphon, we're gonna special out Scale, make itself level 4, go into Solomon, and with Solomon we're gonna add Doom Queen. Then we overlay into Tell, go into Gil, chaining 1 Tell, chaining 2 Gil. Gil will then send Gryphon and Ragna, and Tell will then Foolish lands. We're gonna pop the Gryphon and target Gil. Then we're gonna scale the Doom Queen. Afterwards we're gonna pet out Gryphon and Kepler. Kepler and Gil go into Zeus. And we're gonna pop the gates to activate lands. Then we're gonna activate the Doom Queen to set the Zero King Contract. Now we turn lands to level 4. And go into Siegfried. Let's pause for a bit and slowly analyze this game state. This is the exact game state you want to achieve if you have a 2-card combo with Kepler and Gryphon or Scale, and you don't have an Orthros. In this game state, Zeus is not only online, but Siegfried as well. This means that regardless if the opponent throws an Ash or an Impulse on the Zero King Contract, we can still combo through that. And this is exactly what we will use to our advantage. Because since the release of Doom of Dimensions, it became pretty obvious that the Zero King Contract is our new choke point, so people will keep their hand traps on it. And as you can see, you shouldn't worry about that if you know this particular line. So if you want to take anything out of this video, remember that any 2-card combo with Kepler and Gryphon or Scale will play through an Ash or Impulse on Zero King contract. So you have to make sure to have Zeus and Siegfried online before you want to resolve Zero King contract. You got that? Great. Let's continue with the combo then. Now we activate the Zero King contract to pop the Queen and special Copper, and we can negate the Ash with Zeus. Now we go chain 1 Copper to Fuwalos Necro, chaining 2 Ragna to revive Gryphon. Gryphon will add another Doom Queen. Necro and Gilga go into Alfie. Alfie will then shuffle back Lance and Gil to go into Genghis. Copper and Gryphon go into Small Caesar. Genghis will revive Solomon. We overlay into Big Caesar. Zeus will then pop Small Caesar. We then go chaining 1 Small Caesar, chaining 2 Doom Queen to special herself. Small Caesar will then add the Trap contract. We're gonna scale the other Doom Queen. Now we're gonna pen out Gryphon, go into Gil with Gryphon and Doom Queen. Overlay into Machinex and set the Trap contract. And just like that, we played around an Ash or Impulse on Zero King contract and have Doom Queen in the face-up extra deck and have full board. Oh, and we still have Clovis and a spare Gil for grind game, and another Gil on the field for a floating effect, which is very nice. Now, moving on to the anti-Impulse game plan. So Impulse is a double heavy hitter against us because they can either throw it on, for example, Zero King contract, which is already a choke point, or Necro Slime, which is an even huger choke point if you don't have Orthros, because then they will completely cut you off all the fusion plays that are possible with our deck. Now, what are the possible Impulse scenarios? The first scenario is pretty simple already. They can either throw it on Gryphon, Scale, or the Lance Revive. And all of these spots would be pretty bad spots to choose to throw your Impulse at, because then we can just eat it and combo through to end on a half or a full board, or semi-full board. The second scenario would be if we've reached the checkpoint where we have Siegfried online too, and then when they throw Impulse, we don't care anymore, because then we can just protect it with Siegfried, either when we use it for Zero King contract or for Necro Slime. So the anti-Impulse game plan is pretty simple as well. We try to bait out the Impulse before that with all the possible interaction points, with the Gryphon special, with the Scale special, or with the revive of Lance, for example. And if they don't take the bait, well then it doesn't matter, because then we already have Siegfried online, and then it's too late for them because we can protect ourselves. So without further ado, let's show them how we do it without offers. Alright, let's start off by assuming we get Impulse on the Gryphon or the Scale. Which one they really Impulse doesn't matter, because either way the combo is still the same. In this case, let's say the Gryphon gets hit. We'll then just special out the Scale, and then we can link off into Gilga. Gilga would then send Doom Queen and Ragna, and here you can see why it never mattered which one got Impulse, because now we can simply pen out the Gryphon as well. We turn Scale to level 4, overlay into Solomon, then detach Scale for Solomon's effect. We get another Queen, we bounce back the other Queen, we rescale the Queen, overlay into Tell, burn the opponent, link off into Zeus, Tell then Foolish Lance, Lance now pops the Gate, Ragna now triggers to then revive our Gryphon, Gryphon then adds another Scale. We now trigger Doom Queen to set Zero King contract, make Lance level 4, and immediately go into Siegfried. Now we can use Zero King contract as it's protected. Copper now foolishes Necro. Necro and Gil go into Alfie. We use Zeus to pop the Queen so that we can rescale the other Queen. We can now pen out Gryphon so that we can discard a DD to draw one. Alfie will then shuffle back Lance and Gil to go into Genghis. Gryphon and Copper go into Small Caesar. Genghis now revives Tell, afterwards we go into our Big Caesar. Now we link off Small Caesar and Tell to go into Gil. Then we go chaining 1 Small Caesar, chaining 2 Tell. Tell foolishes Lance again, then we grab our Trap contract. We overlay into our Machinex, then we set our Trap contract, and pass turn. And as you can see, you end on full board after Dominus Impulse with grind game ability with Clovis and a spare Gil in the extra deck. Additionally, Gryphon could have added a DD Headhunt. But I digress. Let's talk about the Impulse on Lance Revive. The combo is the same mode as usual, as you have already known from the Ash combos, so I will spare you the details again. Just enjoy the music up until then. Alright, this is the time where it's the last possible way to impulse us before we get insulated with Siegfried. Alright, it happened, so what now? Well, in that case, just set Zero King contract. We pop Queen to special out our Copper, then we go chaining 1 Copper to foolish our Necro, chaining 2 Ragna to revive our Gryphon. Gryphon will then add another Queen. Now we use Necro and Gil to go into Alfie. Alfie then shuffles back Gil and Necro to go into Genghis. Copper and Gryphon go into our Small Caesar. Genghis then revives our lands. Now we overlay into our Big Caesar. Turn lands to level 4 to go into our Siegfried. Zeus will then pop our Small Caesar, go chaining 1 Small Caesar, chaining 2 Doom Queen. Small Caesar grabs us our Trap contract, we scale the other Doom Queen, pans out our Gryphon, go to our Gil, and then overlay into Machinax and set the Trap contract. And now the opponent doesn't have to face not only 4 Machinax interactions, but 6. Congratulations. And the funniest part was, they did it to themselves because lands couldn't pop a contract, so we have 3. Now let's say they really want to keep the Impulse for the Zero King contract. Well then, the anti-Impulse plan really takes off and we reach our checkpoint, meaning scenario 2, and then we just win from there. Why, you might ask? Well, by the time when we reach our checkpoint, where we want to activate our Zero King contract, what do they want to do? We already have Siegfried and Zeus online. This is basically the same line sequence as you have seen in the anti-Ash game plan, so I will spare you the details here as well. Now we revive our lands by popping our contracts, set the Zero King contract with the Queen, make lands level 4, go to our Siegfried immediately, and now we can freely activate Zero King contract. Congratulations, you played yourself. We pop the Queen to special out Copper, we go chaining 1 Copper to foolish Necro, chaining 2 Ragna to revive Gryphon. Gryphon will add another Doom Queen, Necro and Gil go into Alfie, Alfie will then shuffle back lands and Gil to go into Genghis. Copper and Gryphon go into Small Caesar, then we go and revive our Solomon. We go into our Big Caesar and pop the Small Caesar with our Zeus. We go chaining 1 Caesar, chaining 2 Doom Queen. Caesar gets us the Trap contract. We scale the second Doom Queen, and we're gonna pen out Gryphon, and then we're gonna use Doom Queen and Gryphon to go into Gil. We're gonna overlay into Machinax and set the Trap contract. And just like that, we have full board again with a Doom Queen in the face-up extra deck, plus a Gil as a floater, plus Clovis and Gil as spares for grind game. Awesome to say the least. Now after this is out of the way, let's show you guys how we do it against Imperm and Droll. The usual 1-card combos can already play around Imperm, because with the rank 4 lines we can safely cruise through it. But with the extenders in hand, we can actually increase our endboard ceiling more. This doesn't particularly mean that we increase our endboard ceiling like with the Bright Armageddon for example, but instead having more grind game ability by keeping our Clovis and Gilgamesh in our extra deck. Now Droll on the other hand was not possible to play through with a Kepler 1-card combo, but with the extenders Gryphon and Scale it becomes easy. And I will show you now without Orthros. Starting off with an Imperm on Gilgamesh. As you can already see by the title, it doesn't really matter whether you start off with Gryphon or Scale in hand, because either way you do the rank 4 play before that. So in essence, you end on the same thing. The steps before Gilgamesh are always the same, because in the end we want to fetch Queen and then we go into Tal so that we can go on from there. Now the classic choke point, Imperm on Gilgamesh, what happens? With Tal we now instead foolish lands. We're gonna scale the Queen and then set the Zero King contract. We're gonna activate the Zero King contract to pop the Queen and special out Copper, Copper will then foolish Necro. We're gonna pop the Gate to revive lands so that then we can trigger Doom Queen from the face-up extra deck to special herself and pop herself, to then scale herself. Now we turn lands to level 4 so that we can go into Siegfried. Necro and Tal go into Alfie, Alfie will then fuse into Genghis so that we can shuffle back lands and Tal. We overlay Gilgamesh into Machinax. Genghis now revives Gryphon so that we can go and add Ragna. We're going to scale Ragna right away, and then we go and overlay into Big Caesar. Ragna then revives Solomon so that we can then overlay into Tal again. Tal then burns the opponent. We link into our second Gil. Tal foolishes lands again. We penned out Copper and Gryphon so that we can overlay into Small Caesar and then link off into Zeus. Small Caesar gets us a Trap contract, then we can set the Trap contract and pass turn. The only things that we are missing are the Doom Queen in the face of extra deck and the second Gil in our extra deck. But we still have a Clovis though, so some grind game is still possible. And lands is already foolish, which is great. So I'm pretty satisfied with that. So moving on. Here comes Kepler Gryphon against Droll. Okay, so what happens to the line? Okay, after adding Gate, we get Droll, but still activated, because we need it in our combo. So anyways, we special out Gryphon and go into Gilgamesh. Gilga now sets Doom Queen and Scale. Now we pan out Kepler and Gryphon, use the Kepler to go into our Zeus, then pop the scale so that we can bounce back the Doom Queen. Now we rescale the Doom Queen and set the Zero King contract, so then we pop the Doom Queen to special out Copper. Copper will then Foolish Lance, and then we overlay into Small Caesar, then into Tell to burn the opponent. Now we pop the Gate to revive lands. Doom Queen special so that we can then link off into Gil so that we can Foolish Necro. Necro and Gil go into Alfie. Alfie fuses into Genghis by shuffling back Necro and Gil. We overlay into Machinax so that we can revive our Gryphon. Overlay into our Big Caesar. Go into our Clovis. Clovis then revives our land so that we can go into our Siegfried. And that's our Droll import. Pretty reasonable considering the fact that we only used up our Clovis and we still have a second Gilgamesh left. Now let's show you the Droll line with scale instead. Spoiler, we still end on a good end board pretty comfortably, even with a Droll against an ad of Gate. So anyways, a special scale, go into Gilga, then set Doom Queen and Ragna. We pen out scale and Kepler and then we go into Zeus with scale. Scale then bounces back to Doom Queen, then we rescale her and then we can set Zero King contract directly from the deck. Zeus will then pop Kepler to pen the second time. We pen on Kepler and scale again, but this time we turn and scale to level 4. We activate Zero King contract to pop the Queen and then special out Copper. Copper will then Foolish Necro. Then we go into Small Caesar, then we go to Tell, and then we're gonna burn the opponent. Now we link off Kepler and Tell into Gil. Tell now Foolishes lands. Necro and Gil go into Alfie. Alfie will fuse into Genghis by shuffling back Necro and Gil. Ragnar will revive lands. Genghis will revive Copper. We overlay into Big Caesar, then turn lands to level 4 so that we can go into Siegfried. And lastly, we overlay Gil into Machinax. Scale generates an even better Droll board. And this one has recursion too, because we still have Clovis and the second Gil left in our exo deck. Next up, how does the line work against Nib? Especially if you don't have Orthros in the deck. Well, I can assure you that we can still manage to play through. But this time we have to introduce one more possible Nib spot. But we can still play through that, remember that. So don't panic. So without further ado, let's see how we play through it, shall we? Alright, let's assume we get nipped on Tell again. Spoiler alert, this doesn't matter much. At this point, just sequence the combo at the beginning in autopilot. Because I can assure you, you will always end on something. And right here, the comet hits the field. So anyways, with Tell we're gonna Foolish Lance and then we're gonna scale the Queen so that we can set the Zero King contract. The Zero King contract will then pop the Queen so that we can special out Copper. Copper will then Foolish, obviously, our Necro. Now we trigger our lands to pop the contract so that we can then special out our Queen. Queen will then pop our token. Then we link off Copper and Queen into Gil so that we can then set our Queen and our Ragna. Now we pen out Copper and Kepler. Kepler and Gil go into Zeus, and then we're gonna make lands level 4 to go into our Siegfried. Now Necro and Tell go into Alfie. Alfie will now fuse into Genghis by shuffling back lands and Tell. Ragna triggers to revive the Gryphon. We go chaining 1 Gryphon to add lands back and chaining 2 Genghis to revive our Solomon. We overlay into Big Caesar, then we overlay into Tell so that we can debuff the Nib and then burn the opponent. Zeus will then pop Gryphon to pen again. We pen on Copper and Gryphon so that we can then discard the lands to draw 1. Then we go into our Small Caesar, then we link them off into our second Gil. We go chaining 1 Small Caesar, chaining 2 Tell, Tell will Foolish anything, Small Caesar will grab us the trap contract. Then we overlay into Machinax and set the trap contract. The reason why keeping the Nib might be funny would be for going against Imperms or Evenlies. Depending on the certain matchup, it might be good, so keep that in mind. Otherwise, you could just pop it without a sequencing. Speaking of, let's assume they nib us on Gil, and we, instead of keeping the nib, just pop it with Queen. Well, in this case, we're gonna start off the combo as usual. We're gonna special out the Gryphon first, then we're gonna special out the scale, make itself level 4, go into Solomon, add Queen. Then we overlay to Tell so that we can go into Gil, so that we can go chaining 1 Tell, chaining 2 Gil. Gil will then set Gryphon and Ragna, and we're gonna Foolish the lands. And here comes a nib. Oh no! Anyways, we're gonna pop the Gate so that we can revive lands. Ragna will then revive Gryphon. Gryphon will add another Doom Queen. Then we're gonna pop the Gryphon in scale by targeting lands. We're gonna scale the Doom Queen so that we can directly set the Zero King contract. Now we make lands level 4 to go directly into Siegfried. With Zero King contract, we can now pop the Doom Queen to special out Copper. Copper now Foolishes Necro. Necro and Tell go into Alfie. Alfie will then shuffle back lands to Necro. Now we're gonna scale Doom Queen. Afterwards, you're gonna pen out Gryphon. Gryphon and Copper go into Small Caesar, Genghis will then revive Gil. Then we overlay into Big Caesar, Gil and Small Caesar go into Zeus, Small Caesar gets a trap contract. Zeus pops the Zero King contract to special out Doom Queen so that she can pop the Nib. And now we can pen out a second time, we're gonna pen out Gryphon. Gryphon and Doom Queen go into our second Gil, and we're gonna overlay into Machinex and set the trap contract. And as you can see, as expected, we played through Nib pretty easily, and we ended on almost full board. The only things that are missing are 1, the Zero King contract, and 2, the spare Gil for Grand Game. But we still have a Clovis though. And the second Gil was only wasted because we wanted to have Queen and a face-up extra. Alright, now let's assume they hit the Nib on the Pendulum Summon. The start before that is always the same, so just continue as usual. Alright, and right here the Nib happens, so what do we do? Alright, let's start. We're gonna set the Zero King contract, and then we're gonna pop the Queen by splashing out the Copper. Copper will then Foolish Necro. Now we revive lands by popping the Gate. Doom Queen specials and then pops the Nib token. We're going to turn lands to level 4 so that we can go into Siegfried. Now we banish Necro and Tel to go into Alfie so that we can then fuse into Genghis by shuffling back lands and Tel. Ragna now triggers to revive Gryphon. Go chaining 1 Gryphon to add, chaining 2 Genghis to revive Solomon. Gryphon will add the Doom Queen. Now we go into Tel again so that we can burn the opponent and debuff the Nib. Queen, Gryphon and Tel go into Zeus. Tel then foolishes lands again. We overlay into Big Caesar, then we scale the Queen. Now we pop the Zero King contract so that we can pen summon a second time again, and we're gonna pent out Copper, Gryphon and Kepler. Copper and Gryphon go into Small Caesar, then we're gonna link them off with the second Gil so that we can then fetch a trap contract, overlay into Machinex and set a trap contract. We might have lost the Zero King contract, but at least we still have a debuff Nib so that the opponent can't run over with it, and they can't use evenly and Imperms because they still have a monster. And even though we don't have a second Gil, we still have a Clovis for Grand Game. Now let's look at the possible last Nib spots, being one either when we summon Zeus right away or when we pop the Gate to summon out lands. Because if that would go through, Zeus would just simply negate the Nib. The combo sequence before that is always the same again, so I won't explain it any further, so you don't have to worry about that. Just enjoy the old classic music. Alright, the Nib hits here. What happens? Well, first things first, land still gets revived, and we directly set a Zero King contract with Doom Queen, and we're gonna pop the Doom Queen for Copper. Now we go chaining 1 Copper Foolish Necro, chaining 2 Ragna Revive Zeus. Now we turn lands to level 4 so that we can go into Siegfried right away. Afterwards Necro and Tel go into Alfie, and Alfie shuffles back lands and Tel into Genghis. Zeus then pops Ragna to special out Doom Queen, and Doom Queen then pops the token. Genghis revives Solomon, and then we overlay into Big Caesar, then we overlay into Tel again so that we can burn the opponent and debuff the Nib. Then Tel and Doom Queen go into Gil. We foolish lands again, and then we overlay into Machinex. And this is a pretty okay endboard considering the fact it's the worst Nib spot. Now let's see how it looks like when Nib is too late, meaning when Zeus is live. Spoiler alert, the end is always the same and we almost end on full board. So, regardless, you know how it goes. Alright, if the opponent waited for too long and lands got revived, we can negate the Nib with Zeus, as you can see. Anyways, after that has happened, we're gonna set Zero King contract to then pop the Queen to special Copper. Copper will then go chaining 1, and we go chaining 2 Ragna to revive Gryphon. Copper will then Foolish Necro. Gryphon in turn will add another Doom Queen. Copper and Gryphon go into Small Caesar. Zeus will then pop the Small Caesar, and we're gonna go chaining 1 Small Caesar, chaining 2 Doom Queen to special herself. Small Caesar will get the other trap contract. We're gonna rescale the Doom Queen and then gonna pen out the Kepler. Now we turn lands to level 3 to go into Siegfried with Kepler, Gryphon and lands. Necro and Copper go into Alfie so that we can then shuffle back lands and Gil to go into Genghis. And we're gonna link off Queen and Alfie into Gil so that we can then revive Alfie back. And then we overlay into Big Caesar and overlay into Machinex and set the trap contract. Alright, as you can see, it never matters whether we've used up the contract for the negate of Nib, because then we can either way end on Siegfried and still have Clovis and Gil for grind game. So that's that. Now, lastly, let's talk about the funny interaction that I've mentioned previously, where you can fuse with face down monsters with Alfred's fuse effect to shuffle it back to the deck or extra deck to get the fusion monster out. We can use that mechanic to our advantage by using Book of Eclipse or Book of Moon to dodge targeting effects, for example an Imperm on a certain choke point where you usually get no place further. But with this, we can actually open a new arsenal of possibilities. And I will show you that with the brickiest hand that I can imagine, being 1 Count and 1 Ragna. So let's see how it goes, shall we? Alright, this hand usually dies on 1 Imperm on count. Watch. With Book of Eclipse though, we can dodge that. And because of Alfie, we can go full combo afterwards again. Isn't that great? Anyways, we leap by normal summoning Kepler. Kepler will then grab us Gate. Gate will grab us Queen, as you already know. We will then scale Queen. Queen will then set Zero King contract. Zero King contract will then pop Queen to then special out Copper. Copper will then Foolish Lands. This is basically the rank 4 play again, so I won't continue this. You already know how it goes. But because we have Ragna, now it gets interesting. By linking off into Gilga, Gilga will then set us Queen and scale instead, and we foolish Necro of course. Afterwards we special Gryphon, then we go to Zeus, and right here is where it gets interesting. Necro and Gil go into Alfie, Alfie will then fuse into Genghis by shuffling back Count and Gil, then we pent out our Gryphon to then revive our Ragna, Ragna will then revive on summon our Tell. Zeus will then pop Tail so that we can go chaining 1 Tail, chaining 2 Doom Queen. Doom Queen will then pop Scale so that we can bounce back our Ragna to rescale our Ragna. And you can foolish anything with Tail really. Now we over into Big Caesar so that we can then use Ragna to revive our lands again. Afterwards we go into a Clovis, Clovis will then revive our lands and Clovis go into Siegfried. Then we're going to pent out our Scale and our Gryphon so that we can make the Scale level 4 to make Small Caesar. We link off Small Caesar and Queen so that we can go and fetch our trap contract with Small Caesar and overlay into Machinex and set a trap contract. And right here we are looking at our full board again with a brick hand while dodging Imperm with Book of Eclipse and still have 1 Gilga left to have more grind game. Isn't that awesome? As I said, Alfie opens a whole new universe of deck building. Alright, I know this has been a very long session, but bear with me. Let's look at how the hand trap coverage has changed since the support. As you can see, we have way more 1-card combo hand trap coverage than usual, and we have new Charmy coverage, which is awesome. This time we can really comfortably play around certain Charmies without giving them any draws, and sometimes there are 1-card combos, for example Gate, where you can actually play around the Purulia as well, which is pretty nice. We will take that. And now we can play around Droll pretty well with either Queen or the best with Gate. What the 1-card combo still can offer is that we still can play around Ash or Impulse on Zero King contract, which is impossible to do with the 1-card combos, even with the new support. So let's look at the 2-card combo hand trap coverage, shall we? Alright, as you can see from the first row, the first couple of hand traps, they are already covered by the 1-card combos. But the second row, with the extenders being Gryphon and Scale, for the Kepler 1-card combo that is, you can play around Ash, Impulse and Droll, which is awesome. We can still not play around Purulia though, because Purulia and the Kepler normal summon combo is not good with each other. And Fuwalos, I have to inform you guys, we are still not good into Fuwa. And to really stress it, our Arch Nemesis hand trap is still Fuwa. The only hand trap that we really lose hard against is Fuwa. And that's why we are getting checked by the Fuwa as like a meta threshold to go into meta. If we want to like compete somehow viably, we have to get rid of this weakness. Fuwa to us DDD players is what Droll is to White Forest and Ignister players. This thing alone destroys our only deck mechanic, which is spamming out a large amount of bodies to end on like an almost unbreakable board. It's like guarding our rite of passage to show whether we are competitive enough to be even reasonable in like a YCS or not, or we are just like at the regional or national level. And this is why I strongly advise you to use a lot of non-engine space to combat that Fuwa, to have a lot of outs to it. For example, like not only 3 Ash, but like maybe a called by or like Droll, so that you can self-Droll yourself, because you have already seen we can play under Droll pretty comfortably to not give the opponents more draws. Alright, I'm getting sidetracked with my frustration, so let's talk about Alfred again. Alfie himself is pretty reasonably an instant one-off. I would highly recommend you guys to run him. The grind game and deck building flexibility he enables is simply unimaginably awesome. So let's do him a favor and have him in every single DDD deck. But what does he change exactly though? Let's look at it closely. For the build without Orthros, we have increased our grind game, our resilience, and our difficulty by a bit because there's no Orthros. But we made ourselves more competitive for it because we now have more non-engine room potentially if we want to. With Orthros, however, there's a certain thing that changes. As you can see, we have more grind game with him, we are more resilient with him, a lot more resilient actually. It gets still difficult as usual, but our consistency does take a bit of a hit because we still have to run Orthros in the main deck for it. So in the end, it's all about meta calls again. You have to ask yourself what you really want. Do you want to have more non-engine space, to have more Fuwa outs for example, or some spicy tech that could save you the game against very weird matchups? Or do you take Orthros into the main deck to have more resilience and grind game with taking a hit on consistency, but having always a searchable floodgate out for example? As you have seen, all of these takes are pretty reasonable, and with the right justification, it's very sound. And this is all thanks to Alfred. In the end, it's very exciting to be a DDD player right now. With Alfred introduced, we don't have any cookie cutter deck lists anymore, and we have way more flexibility and freedom to experiment much more. And I'm very eager to see what the competitive side of Yu-Gi-Oh! Has to offer, especially for our deck. Lastly, I want to give a special thank you to all of you for supporting me this far. Your support really means a lot to me and it keeps me going. Also, I want to give a special thank you to the DD Discord, as the community there really helped to improve my quality. And a special thank you to the next one from the DD Discord server too. As discussing the theory and combos with them, I gained a better understanding at Alfie's versatility. So make sure to check out the Discord server, especially for the guys who want to see Orthros lines as well. The link to the server is in the description below. And with that being said, this has been Different Dimension Dreamer, over and out.
To all subjects of a different dimension.
Huh? It's her! That was the Queen's voice!
My name is Zero Doom Queen Martinex. Long ago, the kingdom that my son ruled over was conquered. We lost not only our territory, but our very name. The humiliation we have suffered for so long will not end. Not until the fusion, but also the Xyz, Synchro and Link dimensions have been subjugated. Let the other realms look down upon us. Their arrogance will hasten their downfall. For the weaker they believe us to be, the sooner they will perish. My objective is absolute domination. And my new army shall march. No realms beyond this kingdom shall be trampled underfoot, until all life has been eradicated from this world.